early to mid 90s was a magical time for video games because of all the technology that was getting thrusted at us and just the ever-growing scene of video games and what video games were actually capable of doing. Not only did you have all these home consoles starting to spring up in game notoriety, such as the NES, the Super NES, the Sega Genesis, but you also had arcades that were absolutely thriving at this time. Now, arcade games would end up getting home console ports, but let's be realistic. The arcade version was always superior to the home console port. Whether you're talking about something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter 2, like, yeah, they were decently replicated on our home consoles, but the arcade versions looked better, sounded better, and even played better. A lot of arcade games never even got a home console port just because of the fact that those things couldn't have been done at that point in time on the home consoles that were available. And today we're going to be talking about one of those games today, something that is just an absolutely magical game. I think it still holds up and it still holds the test of time, and it's still something that people talk about today. I, of course, am talking about WWF Wrestlefest. Now, this was developed by Technos Japan and released in late 1991, but this wasn't Technos Japan's first time doing an arcade wrestling game with the WWF license. Back in 1989, they released WWF Superstars into the arcade. Now, at this time, the WWF was really becoming a money-making machine with things like marketing and various forms of merchandise, and WWF Superstars was kind of the tip of the iceberg with that. Now, of course, we did have WWF games on our home console, but they were never nearly as good as the arcade games were. You look at something like WWF WrestleMania on the NES. Is this even a wrestling game? It really plays more like a beat 'em up. I think the music's pretty good in it, but gameplay wise, this was just absolutely terrible. But WWF games in the arcade were absolutely thriving. WWF Superstars was a really fun game, but WWF Wrestlefest took it to just a whole nother level. I remember being a kid and going into a arcade near me called Milford Amusement Center. We've got the fun. And they had like go-karts and batting cages and a big arcade there. And I remember walking into that arcade with my stepdad, and there was 3 machines that really caught my eye and took all of my money. They were the X-Men arcade machine, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade machine, and of course, WWF Wrestlefest. Now, WWF Wrestlefest took the groundwork laid down by WWF Superstars, but really brought the presentation up just an immaculate amount. You had a more diverse roster and more characters that were added into the game. Of course, you had your favorites such as Hulk Hogan, Jake the Snake Roberts, the Ultimate Warrior, the Legion of Doom were added into the game, which of course was a very, very big deal at the time, as the Legion of Doom were awesome. But really, WWF Wrestlefest excels over WWF Superstars simply because of the fact that it takes that stuff but just brings it into a whole nother upper echelon as far as the presentation of the game is concerned. Now, Superstars looks good, but Wrestlefest looks great. You have big, huge character sprites that are well animated that all look exactly like their realistic counterparts. You, of course, have specific moves for each character, including finishing moves. All your favorite finishing moves, whether it's the Hulk Hogan leg drop or Ultimate Warrior's big gorilla press slam, or even Earthquake's thing where he jumps around and then he circles you and he hits the ropes and he splashes on your chest. Everything was replicated so well in this game that it just makes it such an awesome experience. And it's not even necessarily just the inside of the ring action, but you could spill it to the outside and brawl in the outside area and pick up a weapon and hit someone with it. The character sprites just look so damn good, and it's crazy because they still look good today. Like, this is a timeless art style that Technos Japan really put together with this game. Now, gameplay modes, of course, this is an arcade game. It is designed to eat up your quarters, but there are 2 modes within the game. There is the single player experience, which is a Royal Rumble experience. Basically, you're trying to beat people down and throw them out of the ring like you would in a Royal Rumble, and of course be the last person surviving. This is a pretty fun mode as it allows you to see all of the roster and all their glory, and of course being able to throw people over the top rope is always a very satisfying thing. But the real meat and potatoes of the game is the tag team mode, in which you and either a human partner or a AI partner go and try to win the tag team belts from the Legion of Doom. This is just such a cool game mode in my experience, because it's just so much fun to play and see how they try to make these tag teams up, see all these different arenas, because yes, there are different arenas. There's even a blue steel cage match that ends up happening within the game. And obviously, you know, it's not quite as advanced as we got with later on video games in the wrestling genre as far as what you can do with the steel cage, but still, it's super fun. And the graphics and the presentation just take this game to a whole nother level, especially when you consider what was happening at this time frame. So this, to me, would have been a perfect game to bring home. But much like X-Men and much like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, well, I mean, we did get the arcade version on the NES, but it really wasn't all that good compared to the arcade original version of the game. WWF Wrestlefest never came to home consoles. Still to this day, it never came officially released to home consoles. And obviously in 2023, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to do something like that because of licensing. WWF, now known as WWE, is a licensing machine. Now, THQ did try to bring WrestleFest back with a WWE version of the game that, well, it just really wasn't all that good. It just wasn't as fun as the original game. The artwork in the game just looked absolutely terrible comparative to the version of the game that came out in 1990 freaking 1, which I don't understand how we're taking such a step back from that. And of course, it had similar gameplay, but it just wasn't as good as an experience. It wasn't as polished as an experience because it definitely felt a bit like a cash grab. Whereas WrestleFest was something that, you know, Technos Japan was going to live and die from this game and the success of this game. Now, thankfully, this game was very successful. In 1992, it was the most converted cabinet in any arcades, which meant that arcade owners were taking a pre-existing cabinet and converting it over to a WrestleFest cabinet. And it's just left a timeless legacy of games. Of course, you have games that are inspired by WWF Wrestlefest that have come out, such as Retromania Wrestling, which, you know, some people didn't like it quite as much because of the roster. You didn't really have the big stars like Hulk Hogan and stuff like that. But for what it is, I think Retromania is a really fun game, and it's a game that I still pick up from time to time because it reminds me of WrestleFest. Now, you would hope that Arcade 1-Up would potentially pick up the WrestleFest license, but that's never going to happen because of, like I said, licensing issues. So I went ahead and made my own WrestleFest Arcade 1-Up cabinet, and I absolutely love it. It's got all the original style of graphics on there. It plays very well. I have a bunch of other games on there, but that was originally a Final Fight cabinet that I turned into a WrestleFest cabinet because, well, I don't really have nostalgia for Final Fight. Like, Final Fight is cool, don't get me wrong, but it's not WrestleFest. There's a reason why people still play WrestleFest to this day and still talk about in a highly regarded manner, because honestly, it's probably the best wrestling arcade game that ever released, and it's one of the best wrestling video games of all time. Now, of course, with different emulation devices, it's very easy to play this game, and I highly recommend you do. If you're an old school wrestling fan, you've already played this game to death. But even if you're not an old school wrestling fan, or you're a bit on the younger side and never got to experience this game was the catalyst for wrestling video games. This game set the standard of what an excellent wrestling game should be. You have to have the over-the-top presentation. You have to have multiple arenas. You have to have iconic characters who have their iconic moves. And WrestleFest more than delivered on this game. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about WrestleFest today. A great game. Go play it now. And as always, guys, thank you for visiting me here on The Stash. I do have an WrestleFest arcade conversion cabinet video over on my main channel. If you haven't seen that one before, make sure you guys go check that out. I'll put a card up here for that or something if I remember. If not, just search RGT WrestleFest and it'll pop right up. And as always, catch you guys on the next episode. Later.